We've talked before about these lockdowns in some states, particularly in Queensland and in Perth. Millions of people locked down, and yet they found no cases outside the close contacts, outside those who would have been isolated anyway. In other words, the lockdown was for nothing, yet the politicians claim success. Let's go to Catherine Bennett again, the Chair of Epidemiology at Deakin University. Catherine, we've talked about this before, but now you've had a really good scientific analysis of it, and you can tell us that 4 of the last 6 lockdowns have effectively achieved nothing.
Look, that's right. I think we've got to remember that they're put in place as a safety net, Chris, and that's the idea that, if contact tracing doesn't cover it all, or if there's exposure sites they're not aware of, that they're actually able to pick that up or protect against it with the lockdown. But I guess what we've learned over these last lockdowns is that they didn't come into play, and that's a good sign. It shows that our contact tracing was up to the task, that we also, though, did have relatively isolated cases. They didn't have large groups of close contacts. They weren't particularly infectious themselves. So the question for the health departments is, what does it need to look like in order to argue that extra need for that extra safety net? And I think, that's the questions we need to answer now. We don't need to resort to these every time, because repeated success where they don't come into play hopefully reassures governments we don't always need them.
Yeah, it's so important because you don't want to rant and rave. Everyone's trying to do the best thing. Everyone is wanting to be cautious, but a lot of this looked this way at the time. And that's why your work is so important, because it's about confidence, isn't it? They can see that in those cases, their processes of contact tracing were adequate. They had it contained with contact tracing. They needed to have the confidence next time, like maybe Victoria in the here and now, not to resort in a knee-jerk reaction to a large lockdown.
Look, that's right. I mean, you're in essence, with the contacts of contact follow-up that we do in Victoria, you're bringing lockdown to those people with that known risk of exposure. And if you can do that, and you do that as early as you possibly can, like we're seeing already starting now in Victoria, then that's what you need to do. That's where you need to put the resources. And it will affect people. It will affect a lot of people potentially, but it's not the same as having a blanket effect, because you haven't figured out where the risk is. It's only really if you've got evidence of unseen or undetected transmission occurring more widely that you might then make the call that you need to give the health department time to catch up. But at the moment, we have one cluster, a possible or probable source link. We've got to find what happened in between those, and we should know that in the next day or two, and hopefully, again, go from there.
Yeah, the lockdown option doesn't disappear. You might just delay it a day or two before you know. Thanks so much for joining us, Catherine. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Catherine Bennett talking sense there with all the latest scientific evidence on these lockdowns.